Look, I see a lot of movies, and I can honestly tell you this. It has been literally years since I just threw my hands up in the middle of a movie and thought, I genuinely have no idea what's going to happen next. Emilia Pérez made me do that. It's surprising. It's also, I think, quite polarizing. Today, why people can't stop talking about Emilia Pérez. I'm Alamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Why don't we start with some music from Emilia Pérez? Here's a bit of Mi Camino by Selena Gomez. Okay, just walk with me for a moment because I think the movie Emilia Pérez, it just came out on Netflix a couple weeks ago. It needs a bit of setup, and so here's what you need to know. This is a movie that begins with Rita. Rita is an overworked lawyer. Rita gets a call. Rita gets a call from a cartel boss in Mexico, and this cartel boss, that's Emilia Pérez, wants to leave crime behind, get gender-affirming surgery without anybody knowing. But Emilia is only trusting Rita with the secret. So Emilia hires Rita to fake the death of Emilia's gangster persona and then arrange the surgery. And then Emilia begins a new life. That is the first act. That is where the movie begins. We get to much wilder places from there. And also, I don't think I've mentioned this. It is a musical. The movie is a musical. This is one of the most polarizing movies I've seen in a minute. Some critics love this thing. They love the twists and the turns and the spectacles of color and music that are happening in Emilia Pérez. And then other people see major shortcomings in how gender is represented in this movie, how Mexico is represented in this movie. So on today's episode, we are only talking about Emilia Pérez because there's so much to get to. Three critics are here to talk about it with me. Reanna Cruz is here. Sarah-Tai Black is here. Cristina Escobar is here. Reanna, Sarah-Tai, Cristina. Welcome to the show, y'all.
Hello.
It's going to be a wild ride, not nearly as wild as the ride that we went on while you just kind of sit down and watch Emilia Pérez. But Cristina, maybe I'll start with you. The title character here, Emilia Pérez, is played by Carla Sofia Gascon. She may well become the first trans woman to get a Best Actress Oscar nomination. Cristina, what do you make of her performance here?
So I'm rooting for Carla Sofia Gascon. I felt like she did an amazing job. In many ways, the script, the material that she was given is very wooden. These people are not so much characters as they are types. But she's able to bring a sort of real humanity and really light spoiler alert, Emilia Pérez is in many ways a Greek tragedy, right? It's the story of a person who's undone by their hubris, I would say. And she's able to carry that through line across pre and post transition. She's able to show a physical transformation that feels honest. You see a change, but you also see the same person at the core throughout. And she's able to bring a real humanity to a character that can at times feel wooden. So, I thought she did an amazing job.
Carla Sofia Gascon, I should mention, is one of the front runners for for the Best Actress category. Like, people are sort of already talking about her in that particular capacity. I think it's kind of between her and Mikey Madison and Nora as these are the big sort of names in this category. But you mentioned something, Cristina. You said a script that is a bit wooden, and I saw our homie Reanna laugh a little bit. They were a little like, oh. And I like that because that tells me that there's something there. So Carla Sofia Gascon is playing Emilia Pérez both pre and post transition. I do think it's an incredible performance, but also we got to talk about the character Emilia Pérez. And Reanna, this is where you get to go in. Talk about Emilia. Talk about this character and why you had that reaction.
Yeah.
Deep side.
So
Let's go.
I know. I agree. I think the acting was really great from Gascon, but I agree that the script was not really giving. Emilia Pérez as a character to me feels like what a cisgender man would imagine in their head about a trans woman, where she never really lets go of the man inside her and it comes back to haunt her and all of these things that are kind of toxic representations of the trans narrative, particularly trans femininity. And I saw that manifest over the course of the movie. I think the script has a lot of lines in it that equate to things like, who am I? or like she's a he, she, and things like that, like literal lines that appear over and over again in the film, which kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, especially because this movie is supposed to be like an uplifting representation of women, namely the title character, Emilia Perez. You want to go into the movie and be left with, I don't know, not a weird feeling in your stomach as I was watching Emilia Perez. I was like, the way this character is portrayed in terms of her transness feels particularly irresponsible to me.
There's a moment, Reanna, maybe like 2/3 of the way through the movie, or actually we're actually getting like right close to the end of the movie, where one song has Emilia Pérez looking out the window. I will not state. I'm not going to spoil anything past the first act, but there's this like this part where like she's looking out the window in this moving car, and she sort of sings about being half him, half her, and I felt like you kind of just feel it in the theater, be like, that does not feel like the kind of narrative you want to craft, especially this far into the movie and this far into her transition. We're talking about literally years here. That moment kind of stuck out to me. Is that the kind of example you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking about that. I think like also in the first act of the movie, there's a lot of discussion of like the quote unquote he, she. And I mention that because that's something that you hear in songs throughout the first half of the movie. This idea of like Emilia Pérez, despite her being literally a woman who has medically transitioned, which is a whole different, transmedicalist narrative in and of itself, there's this idea that, she will never fully be a woman because she was born a man. And I that didn't sit well with my spirit, if I had to say.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. But Sarah-Tai, I know you also had issues with the way that Emilia's transition was portrayed. I want to talk about one of the first songs in the movie. This is one that takes place in a hospital in Thailand. Doctors are singing about the many medical procedures available. Listen to this. Sarah-Tai, you look stressed that I'm making you even listen to this again. How did you feel about this moment in the movie?
I'm stressed that you didn't put the best line in, which is from penis to vagina. I think it's one of the first lyrics in that, beautifully subtle written song.
Yep.
I will say, to start us off, one of the only joys I have left as a film critic is to go into a movie knowing that I have purposefully avoided knowing anything about it.
Yeah.
So watching this at a press screening at 10 a.m. and being hit with this song within the first 20 minutes, good Lord, God damn.
Yeah, that's quite a start.
Yeah, that was quite a start. This song is really emblematic of the whole movie, of all of the really lovely points that Reanna made. It's this very genital focused, reductive idea of what transitioning is, especially for trans women. Like, yes, transition obviously involves gender affirming surgery for a lot of people, but to locate it so specifically in this, so exploitively in this, is really reductive. It's really gross. It's this very it brings me back to 90s daytime television, Jerry Springer, Jenny Jones, all the exploitation of trans women we saw happening in the very same way, where it was really like, tell me about your penis. It wasn't care for the actual person, their actual history, their story. It's really dehumanizing. And if I may say glibly, worse than that, they had an opportunity to lean into some real camp here, but because of the gaze and the thinking of this film's director, we're taking a sharp left instead towards something that's actually taking itself seriously, while also being just comically bad. I was thinking of something like, Rocky Horror, very problematic text, obviously, but has obviously been reclaimed by queer and trans audiences because it's just the spectacle of it, the bursting through into this queer trans plane of just bananas. The potential is there, but this director is just not the one to take, what could be a very campy story about a trans woman cartel boss. Imagine that on paper.
That's a great premise. That's a great premise.
That could be so fun, depending on the director. But instead here, we've taken this this weird trip down like a cis French man's fantasy of what trans experience is, especially located in Mexico. More on that later, Elamine.
More than that, actually, right now. Okay, I want to signpost 3 things. One, please don't cancel me. I liked Emilia Pérez. This movie mostly worked for me, but that movie mostly worked for me, and I feel wild saying this after everything you guys just said. I understand that.
Elamine.
But the song that you just played was not. I like immediately walked out like, oh, that song needs to go. Like immediately, that's the first song that needs to immediately go out of this movie. I want to come back to that in just a moment. But let's get into the Mexico of it all, Cristina, because this is a movie that is set in Mexico, is entirely shot on sound stages in Paris. What do you make of this representation of Mexico?
Yeah, so
deep sigh.
I think
Everybody's deep sighing today. Let's go.
Apologies to Mexico.
Emilia Pérez is a wild ride. Like if you can just sort of throw your hands up and be like, I don't know where this thing is going to take me and let it carry you, then there is some joy and wildness to it, even though it's nuts. However, it's clearly made by a white, straight French guy, and he's trying to depict things he doesn't know about. And there's a huge distance between him and his characters, between him and his setting. And it's certainly seen in the trans character and the reduction to stereotypes, but it's also seen in the setting of Mexico. Like this movie could have been on Mars as well as it could have been on Mexico. Like there is a light inspiration, right? Where they're like, oh, this market is pretty. Let's recreate it on this soundstage. And it looks beautiful, but there's no real knowledge or deep understanding of what it is to be Mexican. And listen, I'm Mexican American, so I'm a set removed. I wouldn't be doing this thing that he's doing, but what you see is in the film, everybody in Mexico is either part of the cartel or a victim of the cartel. It's 100% defined by this type of violence. And I'm sorry, there's more. There's a whole society out there and people living their lives and other identities and other ways to understand what it is to be Mexican in Mexico. And the film just doesn't have any even curiosity about those things. Like it's just a playground for them to make this like wacky musical with all these twists and turns. And that remove really makes it hard to connect because there's such a big distance between the people telling the story and the characters they're trying to depict and the place they're trying to show.
I mean, like, listen, there are so many things to talk about with this movie, but also Reanna keeps reacting to things. Reanna keeps being like, yeah, I agree, that, and I see that reaction. What was that coming out in reaction to, Reanna? Like, what do you make of the way that Mexico becomes a character in this movie?
I think Cristina literally took the words out of my mouth, where Mexico is a plot device in this movie. And literally, I walked out of that theater and I said exactly what Cristina said, where I was like, Mexico to them is just cartel. That's it. Everybody, like we just said, is either in the cartel, killed by the cartel, or looking for a dead family member that was killed by the cartel. Like, there's really there's
nothing else happens to anybody else in this movie.
Yeah, which, like, I'm not saying we gotta throw like a sepia filter over everything and be like Mexico, but it's like, I don't know, like I think Mexico, for its importance in the movie, I think could have been utilized better if it wants to be the plot device that it sets itself out to be. I think there's like subtle lived in details that I really like. Like, I really like the architecture of Emilia's house, for example. It's like, when you go to a play and you're like, I love the lighting, it was great. But it's like, I think the architecture of her house was really lovely. And I really like the like vaquero dude that like Selena Gomez gets into it with. Like, I think there's like really subtle details in there that like show a glimmer of potential, which is why I'm so frustrated. Cause I'm like, clearly, like, there was a little bit of attention paid and you could have just paid more.
So this is the problem, Sarah-Tai, please don't cancel me. But this is the problem, is like the things that are working are working. Like I think the performances in this movie are actually quite extraordinary. I think Zoe Saldana is putting in an incredible shift. I think Selena Gomez is putting in an incredible shift. And like that is not a sentence that I normally say out loud. This is all on top of everything that Carla Sofia Gascon ends up managing to sort of accomplish in this movie. And we should say this is a movie where the cast, rounding out by Epifania, the woman who plays Epifania, who Emilia Pérez falls in love with a little bit later on in the movie, they shared the Best Actress award at Cannes this year. And I think like to me, Sarah-Tai, there's real chemistry between these characters and these actors and the way that these characters feel lived in together. Like if they're limited, they're sort of limited in the same ways, but I sort of see a fair bit of chemistry between the actors. Do you see the same kind of chemistry between them?
I see it between Carla and Zoe. Maybe there's a bit of trauma bonding going on there. They're both trapped in this horrible movie together, and they've decided to make it the best that they can. I think Carla Sofia Gascon is clearly, you can see the potential she has as an actress. I think that, if she won the Oscar, I wouldn't be mad. But the thing is, to be the first is not really a position filled with integrity or authenticity. Like, no, the first Black actor, the first trans actor, like none of these are ever going to be amazing representations, specifically because they are the first.
You mean they're inherently limited because they're the first? Inherently
limited, yes, thank you. And I in a landscape where awards truly mean nothing, cough, cough, La La Land, why not? Why not give her an award? You know what I mean? I think that the limitations of her role aren't on her. But I do think that Jacques Audiard as a director severely cut out these actresses' performances from the bottom with how poorly written they are, how poorly characterized they are. You might have liked Selena Gomez, but I think she's the only professional singer in this whole cast, and she has like some of the worst performances. I think that when we get like the master edit of this film down to like the most accidentally comedic moment, she's gonna feature in that quite a bit. So I was pretty disappointed with her performance, and I think in terms of her character, there are really insidious ways that she acts as a kind of quote unquote more real woman foil to Carla's character, especially later in the film. But yeah, there's a lot of insidious things going on, and I don't think any of those actresses are to blame for that. It's just unfortunate that, this is what they were working on, I guess. I would love to see Carla, especially in something else. Yeah. Like, I'm sure she would be amazing.
If folks are just joining us, my name is Alamin Abdulmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. I'm talking to Reanna Cruz and Sarah-Tai Black and Cristina Escobar about the musical Emilia Pérez. We have mentioned that it's a musical. I don't think we played enough music from it. So let's play another song. This is from the second half of the movie. Rita, that's the lawyer that Emilia confides in, is like this fundraiser for Emilia's new foundation supporting victims of drug cartel violence. Cristina, I'm sorry to report that this song goes. Look, the soundtrack of this movie has already won a lot of awards at festivals around the world. What do you think of the soundtrack? What do you make of the music of this movie?
Yeah, I didn't walk away humming any of the songs.
No, they are not hummable songs. That is not yet.
None of them caught in my brain in any sort of way. But I will say I did walk away thinking about this moment and Zoe Saldana's performance because she eats this song. Absolutely. I loved seeing her use her full faculties, right? Singing, dancing, and acting. I liked how close the camera got so often to her face. Many of her most famous roles, she's hidden behind blue and green makeup and obscured. And so to really be so close to her and to see her own this stage, to take up this space, to perform at this level, the visual, as you were playing this song, of her doing this particular number did stick with me. So it wasn't so much any of the songs individually or collectively, but
Yeah.
some of the productions I did think were really quite stunning.
Yeah, I agree. I think like that is like that's the thing that they come to life in the movie. I'm not going to be bumping the soundtrack at the gym. You know what I mean? Like that is like not going to be a part of my like regular fabric of my life. Sarah-Tai, we've talked about ODR a bunch of times over this conversation, but I think we got to go in a little bit. So we're talking about a straight white French director. You've described his work as anthropological. I think that's a great word to describe it because there is a prophet, you know, which he sort of like dips into Algerian and Moroccan experiences that are like, what business do you have here, sir? There's Dupont, which kind of same vibe. And then there's this. And so I think in the Audiard imagination, he sort of says, what country has a thing can I dip into? And then he makes a movie about it. And I'm not immediately for this, but I'm also not immediately against it. What's the case against?
I mean, I feel like at this point he just spins a globe and just picks whatever happens next. You know, A Prophet is a great example. I don't think any white French person has any business making a film about Algerian people, but you know, I'm not going to stick on that. We could make this an hour.
But A Prophet is also like not
talk-
a bad movie, I don't think. It's just, it's very limited in its perspective. But anyway, continue. Sorry.
Yeah. I would say his work is anthropological, but in this twisted sense where in the way that we've already talked about, it's very much his own fetishistic fantasy. This is a white cis French man's fantasy, and I cannot overstate that more. He's making his own scenes. They're self-satisfying, so he can be a voyeur in his entirely self-fashioned universe that has no connection to the reality of Mexico, no connection to the reality of trans women, never mind no connection to the reality of trans women in Mexico. Mexico is one of the deadliest places in the world for trans women. And this is why I get so upset about Emilia Pérez. And, you know, we can talk about, oh, I like that song, I like that. But at the end of the day, this is really harmful stuff. You know, it's continuing this long French colonial history of imagining other people, other places in this super reductive, super offensive way. It's very French pejorative, you know, as opposed to something like Corley Farge's The Substance, which is very French complimentary, you know, leaning into the camp, leaning into the absurd spectacle of it all. Yeah. But instead, with Emilia Pérez, we're getting this continuation of on-screen histories of this director telling stories that he just has no business or connection or lived experience with. And, you know, you mentioned A Prophet is a quote unquote good movie, like, sure. And we could also like compare Jacques Audiard with someone like Sean Baker, who's also dabbling in places that I don't think he has much business dabbling in, with something like Honora, Tangerine, The Florida Project, even
movies
though
about sex work, even though,
yeah, movies about sex work, movies about American poverty, movies about Black trans sex workers. Like, he has no business doing this, but his craft and his narrative skills are at least at a certain level, you know, and I'm not saying this makes up for the problematics of it. But the thing with Jacques Audiard is that with Emilia Pérez specifically, like, it's just, we've reached hack level with Emilia Pérez, and there's no saving it. Not that I think it should be saved. There's no grace, there's no craft. I heard him described as evil, like, several times within 24 hours of seeing this. And I do think this is an evil, nasty little movie. I'm not going to lie to you.
So
evil.
I think like this is the thing I wanted to get to, Reanna, but also I have like a minute and a half left here. Is like there's a difference and a distance between the craft of the movie and the work that the movie is doing. I think those are two different things. This is a movie that won the jury prize at Cannes, maybe to Sarah-Tai's point, French derogatory. Also won the actress prize at Cannes. It's getting a lot of Oscar buzz. People are receiving it as a crowd pleaser. What are they missing if they're receiving it as a crowd pleaser?
So here's why I think Emilia Pérez is so successful right now in terms of the awards race. I think it's two reasons. I think one is this idea of festival brain, where, you know, you go to Cannes, something like Cannes, and I've had friends report back to me. They saw Emilia Pérez, loved it, watched it again on its own, and were like, not so good. It's, you know, you watch like 10 movies in the course of 48 hours and your brain kind of like turns into mush. And then you see something that's like different and a little bit interesting. And you're like, oh, wow, like Emilia Pérez was so exciting and captivating. So I think that's part of it. I think that's why it did so well in its festival run.
30 seconds.
And I also think,
yeah, sorry.
Yeah. And I also think that, like, I don't know, I feel like in a moment where trans people are vilified in the culture, cis people could watch this and be like, oh, sweet, a movie about a trans woman, not thinking critically, and be like, this is good.
So like the excitement about receiving this movie is maybe nothing to do necessarily with what's in the movie. It's kind of like a larger sort of social context.
I think so.
I take your point. I'm gonna go and sit with that and go, Elamine, what did you enjoy about this movie? Which is Homer for me. I'm gonna do it. In the meantime, Cristina and Reanna and Sarah-Tai, I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah-Tai is a film critic in Toronto. Their work shows up at the Globe and Mail and right here on Commotion. Reanna Cruz is a freelance music journalist and producer of the podcast Switched on Pop. Cristina Escobar is a co-founder and editor-in-chief of LatinaMedia.co. You can watch Emilia Pérez right now on Netflix. My name is Elamine Abdulmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. See you tomorrow.